One of the questions we get, I'd say daily, is how much dehumidification do I need for my room? You know, there's multiple ways for doing this. There's the old kind of water in, water out, you know, however much you put in, 97% will transpire out. You know, that's kind of one of the formulas that's used. The other one that I just go back from my experience from cultivating is essentially 40 to 50 pints per light is 9 times out of 10 is always spot on for what you're going to need. So it's a really quick, easy way for, you know, speccing a facility. You know, sometimes people want a bit more information on how you're going to get these numbers because they think just the old back of a napkin method of 40 pints per light is a little bit.
How do you feel if you're in a situation, because obviously, you know, different growers, different ways, right? Like if you're doing hydroponics or aeroponics, let's say, where you're going to be, you know, more transpiring from the water itself and evaporating that into the airstream. Like how is that going to differ? Do you think there's a difference there? I mean, there's got to be certain formulas or certain ways where, you know, the water in, water out method might be more effective.
In some ways, but usually when you're doing the 40 to 50 pints per light, that's allocating a huge amount of redundancy in there as well.
Yeah, fair.
You know, and that's running it, so you're going to be way over-specced in your first weeks of flower.
Yeah.
But this is going to allow you to keep your set points, you know, flatlined when you're going down to your final couple weeks of flower, when you're crashing your temps, when you're going down to that 68, 65 Fahrenheit.
And that's what I don't like about the water in, water out method. I think it's a great method because that is essentially what the latent load is, right? I mean, it's everything that's going to transpire. But what I don't like about it is, you know, somebody will say I use, you know, 500 gallons a day, right? Or 500 gallons a day. And then the issue with that method is that they'll look at this dehumidifier and they'll go, this thing's 250 pints. Okay, so I need, let's say his load is 2,500 pints a day, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, okay, well, I just need, you know, 20 of these, right? Well, that's fine, but this unit's 250 pints at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 60% relative humidity. What's it doing at 60 degrees and 45% relative humidity when you're in your last week of flower?
Yeah,
probably half, right?
Half the capacity for sure.
So that's where people go wrong when they use water in, water out, right? Yeah. You got to take your worst case scenario of when you're going to take your any math load, you want to do it under worst case scenario. That worst case scenario is going to be week 7, week 8 of flower. You know what I mean? You want your VPD in check, you want your temps crashed, and this unit, unfortunately, or any refrigerant dehumidifier, it cannot perform the same level at 60 degrees Fahrenheit as it can at 80, right? We all know that. I mean, we've done some huge changes in technology to just even get that extra 15, 20% efficiency increase over some of the other products on the market. But that's achieving at the maximum. But even at that, you're still going to be losing a lot of capacity as you drop those temps. So if people are going to use water in, water out, I just encourage them to get the sheet, find out what it's doing. Let's say your 60 degrees is where your last week of flower you want to be. Use that, find out what that dehumidifier puts out at that condition, right? And then you calculate how many dehumidifiers you want. If you're going to do that, then you're going to be okay. And it'll probably come in at somewhere at 40, 50 pounds per light.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the issues, you know, early on in Canadian legalization, you had these big engineering firms coming in and they were just measuring the water in, water out, and they were massively under-speccing these facilities. And, you know, it led to, everybody's heard the stories of the big players in the industry having these massive, you know, square footage facilities that were just loaded with powder mold and boideritis, and it's because they weren't able to spec them properly, and that just is simply because they didn't have experience with growing cannabis. So, and that's where the industry's now changed, where, you know, the people from the industry are now the ones running the industry, which is good.
Well, there was even, I've been to mechanical spec places that the engineer didn't even consider the water in, water out. They just looked at the air conditioning and figured that the latent load of the air conditioner could do enough to remove the moisture, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, you know, places fired up, it's Health Canada, this is great, and they're 80% relative humidity, and they're calling you going, hey, how many dehumidifiers can I buy off you today, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've seen that change. That's definitely not the case anymore, but a lot of these engineers were not experienced in any way at speccing cannabis facilities. So.
And you're seeing the same mistakes made in the new emerging markets, you know, not necessarily in the United States because it's regionally legal, but when you look at, say, Europe, some of the Eastern countries that we've been, you know, speccing products for, they come in, they have these big fancy engineer firms, and they're massively missing the mark when they're speccing their facilities. And we have to come into them and explain to them the reasons why you need to be over-speccing your facility, and because of the range in temperatures, and explaining that the units are based on an 80-60 and it's going to be far different when you cross your temperatures at the end.
If you're in a situation where you're going to be speccing a room, again, you can send us an email, give us a call. We'll send those sheets. We'll give you those submittal data spec sheets of what that temperature condition is. So if you want to let us know, hey, I'm speccing a room, my peak low temperature is going to be 60 degrees Fahrenheit, we'll be able to provide the data for you of that unit and what it's going to perform at that condition. That way, whatever your calculation is going to be, you're going to make sure you're going to be right on point and you're not going to be under-speccing. So if you go to our website, you can usually get our submittal data, but from there, if you need to get any sort of specification sheets on certain conditions, we can provide that.
#NoPM.